Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. June 15th is one of those dates where history walks in wearing a crown, carrying a lawsuit, bleeding from experimental medicine, and asking whether anyone checked the life jackets. It is a day of bad omens, collapsing authority, and warning signs only mattering if someone in charge can read. Segment 1, and the sky becomes evidence. On June 15th, 763 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was already dealing with famine, plague, and rebellion in the capital city of Ashur, the ancient Near Eastern version of opening your email and finding every subject line says urgent. Then, a near total solar eclipse darkened the sky. To us, that is astronomy. To them, it was the sun filing a divine misconduct report. The Assyrian scribes noted the revolt and eclipse with remarkable calm, basically writing, "Capital in chaos, sun disappeared, Tuesday." That tiny clay tablet entry later became a gift to modern historians, because eclipses can be calculated backward. Pinning it to June 15th, 763 BC helped anchor the chronology of Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, and Israel. One terrifying afternoon became the world's oldest timestamp, with panic included. The same appetite for cosmic meaning appears in 1219 at the Battle of Lindenese, where Danish forces in Estonia were nearly routed before, legend says, a red flag with a white cross fell from heaven and rallied them. Historians will gently point out that flags do not usually arrive by weather event. But the story became the origin legend of Denmark's Dannebrog. That is how power brands itself. Take a battle, add miracle packaging, and call it destiny. June 15th reminds us that people rarely experience chaos and say, let's verify the data. They say, clearly the sky has endorsed our side. Segment 2, and kings meet the terms and conditions. In 1215, King John of England arrived at Runnymede, a marshy meadow where the Magna Carta was sealed under the least romantic circumstances imaginable. Armed barons, royal failure, and everybody pretending this was a meeting. John had lost Normandy, taxed his nobles heavily to fund more losing, and abused enough power that even medieval aristocrats said, "Sir, this seems excessive." The Magna Carta was not born as a universal love letter to liberty. It was a peace deal for wealthy barons with swords. But inside that elite complaint form was a radical principle. The king was not above the law. No imprisonment, exile, or seizure of rights without lawful judgment. Naturally, John tried to escape it by asking Pope Innocent III to annul the charter, which the Pope did. So the Magna Carta's first life lasted about as long as a free trial you forgot to cancel. It survived because John died the next year, and his son's supporters reissued it as damage control. Then, in 1381, Wat Tyler led peasants into London after plague survivors realized labor had value, and the government responded with wage controls and a poll tax, because nothing says stable society like charging poor people for a war they did not order. Tyler demanded abolition of serfdom, met the teenage King Richard II at Smithfield, and was cut down by the mayor of London during negotiations. Richard promised reforms, sent the rebels home, then broke every promise. The revolt failed, but serfdom kept declining anyway. The monarchy won the afternoon and still lost the argument, which is what happens when your economy depends on peasants never learning supply and demand. Segment 3, and legitimacy has a cancellation policy. On June 15, 1567, Mary, Queen of Scots, met rebel Scottish lords at Carberry Hill after her reign had become a prestige drama with fewer dragons and more suspicious husbands. Her second husband, Lord Darnley, had been murdered in a mysterious explosion, and Mary then married James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, the man widely believed to be involved. As royal public relations go, that is less fresh starts and more, did nobody stop the carriage? The rebel lords raised an army. Mary's forces faced them outside Edinburgh, and then her support dissolved without a battle. Her troops simply refused to fight and drifted away in the summer heat. Monarchy did not fall in a glorious charge. It evaporated like a bad alibi. Mary surrendered, Bothwell escaped, and she was eventually imprisoned, forced to abdicate for her infant son James VI, then locked up for years in England by Queen Elizabeth I. Authority, it turns out, is not just inherited. It has to survive public belief. That same question reappeared in 1775, when the Second Continental Congress appointed George Washington Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Washington was chosen partly for experience, but also because he was a wealthy Virginian who could bind the southern colonies to what had been mostly a New England rebellion. It was coalition building in boots. Find the one guy who looks like he already has a portrait. And in 1977, Spain held its first free election since 1936, with Adolfo Suarez, a former Franco regime insider, helping dismantle dictatorship from inside the old system. That is like convincing a locked door to discover democracy. From Mary to Washington to Spain, June 15th keeps asking, when old symbols stop working, who gets people to believe in the next ones? Segment 4. And progress arrives looking uninsured. Science and invention on June 15th have a remarkable, no one has invented the waiver yet energy. In 1667, French physician Jean-Baptiste Denis performed the first fully documented human blood transfusion by moving blood from a sheep into a feverish 15-year-old boy. The boy had already been bled so much by other doctors that the treatment plan was basically, maybe stop subtracting teenager. He survived, mostly because the amount of sheep blood was small. Denis took this as encouragement because early medicine treated not immediately dead as a glowing review. He believed gentle animal blood might calm human patients, which is sweet if you ignore the immune system standing nearby with a chair. Later experiments went badly. One patient died, and the scandal included rival doctors and an arsenic poisoning wife, because apparently calf blood alone was not enough plot. Europe banned transfusions for generations, delaying a life-saving science because the first draft looked like barnyard sorcery. Then, in 1844, Charles Goodyear patented vulcanized rubber, turning sticky tree sap into a material that could survive heat, cold, water, and industrial capitalism. Rubber made modern tires, insulation, bicycles, cars, and aviation possible. Naturally, Goodyear died in poverty and debt because the reward for inventing the future is often watching someone else name a company after you later. In 1919, Captain John Alcock and Lieutenant Arthur Whitten Brown completed the first non-stop transatlantic flight in a modified Vickers-Vimy bomber. Their radio failed, ice choked the engines, and they landed nose first in an Irish bog. But they crossed the Atlantic in under 17 hours. Progress is not always graceful. Sometimes it is a half-frozen man, a broken aircraft, and a mud landing saying, "Good news, the world is smaller now." Segment 5, and the modern world sends an invoice. On June 15, 1826, Sultan Mahmud II dealt with the Janissaries, the Ottoman Empire's once elite soldiers who had become a hereditary political machine, blocking reform and threatening sultans. Mahmud announced a new European-style army. The Janissaries mutinied and then discovered the Sultan had prepared his response in artillery. Their barracks were bombarded, thousands were killed, the corps was abolished, and the event was later called the Auspicious Incident, a phrase with the same emotional range as calling a bear attack outdoor feedback. In 1864, Union forces opened the Second Battle of Petersburg, broke through Confederate defenses, hesitated, and gave Robert E. Lee's army time to seal the line, turning a possible quick victory into a 9-month siege. That same day, Congress moved to equalize pay for black soldiers in the United States colored troops, men proving their worth while paperwork arrived late, as paperwork loves to do. June 15th also shows what happens when systems fail civilians. In 1904, the PS General Slocum caught fire during a church picnic in New York's East River. Rotten hoses burst, the crew had not drilled, and life preservers were so degraded that some were weighted with iron to fake compliance. That is not safety equipment. That is fraud with straps. More than 1,000 people died, and little Germany was shattered. Then, in 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines just as Typhoon Yunya arrived, turning volcanic ash into wet concrete that collapsed roofs and buried towns. From cannons to trenches to inspection fraud to ash, the modern world keeps promising control, then handing us the receipt. In conclusion, June 15th gives us eclipses that become calendars, charters that outlive the kings who hated them, queens abandoned by their own armies, inventions born from terrifying experiments, reforms enforced by canon, and disasters that finally make officials inspect the equipment. It is not a neat march of progress. It is a group project where half the class forgot the assignment, one person brought sheep blood, and the sky occasionally turns off the lights to get everyone's attention.